In today's video, I want to chat about all things working with deity, specifically the dark goddess. So if you're interested to learn more about this very deep and fascinating topic, then do get yourself a nice hot drink, settle back, relax and enjoy. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that you are well and safe and looking after yourselves. This is a video that I have wanted to make for years, and I think that it is a topic that you can find widely explored online, but there's also a lot of misinformation as well. So I wanted to share a video about what I think are really important things to consider when it comes to working with deity and how to approach working with deity for the first time, as well as different tips, techniques, etc. that you can also incorporate. I'm specifically going to discuss working with the dark goddess. However, you can apply these concepts, ideas, etc. to working with most deities, if not all deities. So I want this to be just a guide really for those who are seeking. For those of you who are more advanced practitioners or who have already worked with deity, you may know a lot of this already. However, maybe there are certain ways in which I can share I've worked with deity that may be interesting to you, so you may wish to watch anyway. So first of all, why work with deity? Why work with the dark goddess specifically? I think that in more recent times it's become popularized because it's this idea of it being really cool or really edgy, and it's sort of glamorized somewhat on TikTok, etc., and as a popular practice. However, there are deep mystical and historical anthropological roots to working with deity, and it's something that humans have done since we've been on the planet. So it's a very complicated and broad topic, and it would be another concept entirely to looking at ancient civilizations and the ways in which they worked with deities and the ways in which matriarchal societies worked with the divine feminine, the goddess, as well as then religion coming in and the transition into a patriarchal society that we now know of. That would be a whole other video, so I'm not going to touch on those more. I would maybe one day, that would be a great thing to do, and there are great books that you can look into, great resources that you can look into, and I would probably recommend going to historians to look into that kind of thing, like the work of Ronald Hutton. There's a book by Merlin Stone, When God Was a Woman. There are a number of other texts as well that explore this, but we won't go into depth with that here. But just suffice it to say that it has been done for a very long time to connect with and to revere and to worship gods, deities. I'm coming at it from the perspective of someone who identifies both as a witch and as a polytheist, pagan and animist, and some may say that those conflict. I mean, I do feel I'm animist in the heart. Discovering pantheism in my teens was how I then discovered animism. That's something I really resonate with, and I've talked a little bit about that in another video. But animism is the oldest kind of religious practice that we have. It really centers on this idea of everything having a spirit, and the land that you're on and the plants and the trees and everything. I think one thing that we seem to have lost in modern day practices and a lot of the new age movements that we see, and also a lot of the eclectic witchcraft things that we see, especially books that are marketed to the masses, are very much about how I can use this particular herb or crystal to get what I want, not considering the innate spirit within the stone or within the plant. And there's a similar ideal that has been applied to deity as well, this idea of a kind of vending machine style of practicing that feels very surface level. And I've been in groups where that has gone on in front of me, and it doesn't feel particularly comfortable, it doesn't feel particularly sacred, it doesn't resonate with me. For that as well, I'm going to say from my own experience that because I came to witchcraft when I was very young, I grew up in a Church of England church which wasn't very strict, and my parents weren't very strict either with that belief or religion. It came very much more from the heart, I think, for both my parents, and my sister and I were empowered to make our own choices. So very early on my sister decided that Christianity wasn't for her, so she felt that she was more of an atheist. My husband now is rather an agnostic. He doesn't really know what there is, but he's sort of open. And for me, I always believed in a form of divinity, a form of divine, and I was called to witchcraft because I felt the divine in sacred natural places, so at the seaside and in the woodlands, and when I'd take walks on the country lanes and pass by fields of horses and such, I would feel that connection very strongly. And so for me, that's when I started to understand about pantheism. It's when I started to feel very, very connected to nature and in awe of nature and the spirit of different places, and through that also seeking out a connection to a deity that I knew about, and that was Jesus. It was Mother Mary, and not coming from a Catholic background either, that was slightly different, and it wasn't exactly easy for me to learn about or connect with Mary. But for me, like, understanding that there was that feminine principle, that aspect there, was key. When I learnt about Wicca, which was basically when I was 11, 12, I really loved that there was both a feminine and a masculine principle there, and then there was the spirit as well, but it did still feel too rigid for me. But I loved that it incorporated both.
And that's in contrast to, obviously, my upbringing in Christianity. And even though the denomination of Christianity was Church of England, which was not as rigid of a structure as the Baptist Church, for instance, which is when I experienced a form of religious trauma.
And so that was really just the opening up for me. And I bring it up here because I want to talk about how being raised within Christianity, although I did experience some Christian trauma later on when I attended more of a Baptist church setting, my experience of working closely with Jesus specifically taught me a lot about connecting with other deities. It was with connection to various people in the church where I learned how to structure a prayer, and you know, I did encounter some people who were not dogmatic and who were not problematic in their thoughts, and then there were people who were as well. Also, I want to say that my experience does not in any way invalidate anyone else's experience. I know that some people had some really, really awful traumatic experiences within the church or being raised in a Christian family. I will say for me that it was both good and bad, because I learnt a lot, but I also did experience some trauma. Thankfully, none of it came from my family and like my upbringing specifically. It came after that. But I do think that it's important to say that my experiences of both positive and negative coming from a Christian background does not in any way, it doesn't speak for everyone. It's not to invalidate anyone else's experience if it was a lot of painful and traumatic experiences, which I'm sure for many it was. And also I appreciate as well that the irony seemingly of a witch coming online talking about working with deity, and the first thing I talk about is working with Jesus. I want to set the stage to explain where I'm coming from, but because there are more similarities than there are not, especially when it's connecting in a really, really deep and profound way, and listening and sitting with and being comforted by and being led by spirit of the deity that you're working with. I will also say here as well that because I am just one person, I'm one witch, I'm one polytheist, I'm one pagan practitioner, I am not speaking for everyone. Everyone will have different experiences, and that's completely okay as well. And so if some of this lands and some of it doesn't, that's also okay. This is not a science, or not that even sciences are like that, but this is not like a absolute, this is one person's experience, and therefore what I'm setting out is based on that. So contextually, again, looking at magical practices historically were framed as either theurgy or thaumaturgy. Theurgy being the kind of practice that will get you closer to a godhead or a divine or divinity, and also closer to that unity with said divine, said deity, a kind of apotheosis. And thaumaturgy being much more of a kind of practice of magic that is rooted in the everyday, in the needs, etc. And so this is a lot more your natural magic, so your astrology, your plant magic, your folk magics, etc. However, I do feel like there is a part where they come together as well, because I suppose for a witch who does not have a faith in anything, or who is atheist witch, which is absolutely acceptable, or a left-hand practitioner as well, a left-hand witch would have slightly different ways of looking at it, and I actually oddly do consider myself to be on a similar pathway to that as well. So I'm much more of a grey witch I suppose, if you're going to use colour, but not that I would suggest utilising colour to explain yourself either, because then you get into white and black magic, and that is extremely problematic because it has a lot of racial connotations, and really what you're talking about is a magic that is deemed to be beneficial, or a magic that is deemed to be malevolent or maleficent, malefica, etc. And white and black magic is more of a term that has racial connotations, and so that's not something that I would like to use. But in terms of it being like a blend of the right and left hand path, and more of a kind of a seeking of a harmony, a dynamic balance between the two, because you can't have the light without the shadow. I do feel like there is a blend somewhat, because for me, even if I'm doing thaumaturgical practices, I'm still connecting with deity. But that's not the only reason I would connect to deity. And also for reaching an apotheosis or reaching some kind of godly state myself is not the only reason why I connect to deity. So why do I connect to deity? Connection is a huge part of my practice, and it always has been. And even though I didn't have the words to conceptualize it in that way when I was younger, it was always about being in communion with the land, with the sky, the sea, the spirits around me. That's what it was based in, and that's where it came from. And feeling like there was a connection there between the lived aspects of me and the manifest of nature, essentially, and that spirit and those spirits existing together and co-creating together. And that's very much how I see my magic working, and it's very, very powerful and important for me. And indeed, many people will say, oh, how would you consider yourself to be practicing on a day-to-day? What are your practices? And people often talk about the actual physical practices like enchanting the coffee, etc., which are definitely important. But I often see my real life as being a massive part of my magical life, and my magical life being a massive part of my real life, because I am so connected to the deities I work with and the spirits I work with, and they inform and infuse me with power, with support, with comfort, stability. I have come through so much with the support of the deities I work with, and I have had the strength to stand up for myself and for others with the support of the deities I work with. And so there is so much richness that you can receive and to give, and in this reciprocal connective way, when you are in a sacred partnership and a reciprocal relationship with a deity, that it goes far beyond your intention for something, like your intention for a spell being love, so you call on Aphrodite or Venus or Freya. It's so much more powerful and profound than that. And really, I think the only way to really understand that in a grounded way is to actually experience it. And so for that, I would highly recommend giving it a go. And I say this with a caveat. I am not one of these people that would say that you have to be really advanced or have even practiced really to work with a deity, because I feel that so many people work with deity without being magical at all, and that's also possible. I don't necessarily ascribe to that idea that you have to be someone who's well practiced before you begin, but I do think you have to have a good understanding of what it means to be in partnership with, in communion with, to be working with, or to revere deity. Many practitioners will talk about the idea of worship, and how worship, that idea doesn't come into their vocabulary the way it would with something like Christianity, for those kind of reasons that Christianity was used by the patriarchy to suppress, to control, and it very much was a tool of oppression, and that's not something that we want to continue. But also Christian practices, prayer, working with saints, etc., was utilized within many folk practices to empower their work, actually. And one could say, in a way, I'm sure some people went through the motions just to be able to continue to do their work, but many folks did practice what you could call magical techniques, and often they didn't call it witchcraft or spells or magic, but they were the charms, the things that were passed down, family remedies, etc., to heal and to support. And those things were carried out in the same way, but with the addition of a psalm spoken aloud or a prayer to Father, Son, Spirit, etc. And I would argue that many people who practiced in that way actually did have a faith and actually did have a very strong belief. And in a beautiful way, I think that shows how it is possible to work with a Christian deity and God, and to continue the good work that you do in your practice without being beholden to the patriarchy or whatever. But again, that's another sticky subject that's kind of up to debate. It's how, I think, how the work is done. But yeah, I'm sure that there were many folk practitioners who just went through the motions of reading out a psalm and didn't particularly believe. I'm sure that you had many people on the spectrum there with differing views and opinions, but with Christianity being the dominant at that time, then I believe that it was done naturally initially as a way to protect and to continue those traditions. So we've talked about why, and that's a huge topic that we could go further into. If you're watching this video, I'm assuming that you either already have a practice with a deity or several deities, or you're looking to build one. And so what you are going to want to find out about are some of the key concepts and core principles. So I've touched on it already, but working with deity is not about pushing a button and saying, I want this, give it to me. There are also, in older grimoires, there are ways in which magicians have approached spirits in a very aggressive manner with commands, etc., and that is not something that I would ever advise. And for me, when I approach deity for the first time, it is with a deep reverence and respect, and usually before there's any kind of approach, unless I receive a vision or a dream from them, which we'll talk about how you may know their calling in a bit, I will have researched into their mythology, into the original source material. So for the Morrigan, there are a number of original sources of lore that were written down, the Tambo, Cunha, etc. There are a number. That's specific to the Morrigan though. So if you are attempting to work with a Greek deity, there is quite a lot of Greek mythology written by a number of different authors from ancient Greece and that you can look into, and so it depends, of course, but I would definitely recommend that as a starting point, and approaching it with reverence, respect, an open mind, with curiosity, and with an understanding that they are not there to serve you, they are not there to boost your ego, to pamper you, or to tell you that everything you're doing is great. They are not necessarily going to be there when you call either. Sometimes they won't respond at all, sometimes they will, sometimes it will be slow, sometimes they'll come in and go out. This is the way that it is because they have their own things to do. They have quite a lot to do, especially the Dark Goddess has a lot to do these days. I would also put the caveat in there that it is not a command that they join you or a call for them to be here now, but more of an invitation, an opening, an opportunity. And so it's you presenting yourself and saying, I am interested, I am keen, I have learnt this, this and this, I really like that you are like this, this and this. And it's a way of approaching deity and any other spirit that you can do if you are able to already know some things about them, to speak some things that you like about them. If you are doing this in a ritual setting, perhaps you've set yourself up in a ritual setting, perhaps you've cast a circle or whatever and you are calling out to a deity. You'll do it in a very, very respectful way, and think of it as well like you were working with any other person. If you are introducing yourself to a potential friend for the first time, you're not going to go in there and ask them for a favor straight away. You're not going to go in there and start telling them all of your problems either. You're going to go in there and introduce yourself. Tell them maybe a little bit about yourself, but also tell them why you're interested in working with them, and tell them what you've learned about them, and tell them what you like about them and why you're interested in them, and give them an invitation and allow them to come into your space if they are able to. Invite them into your dreams if you wish, or invite them into the space with reverence, respect, and a kind of openness and a willingness to learn and to seek. The other thing to understand is that although when we're working with deity, with gods, often people think of these figures as needing to be perfect, or people will automatically kind of transpose the idea of a Christian god onto other pagan deities, and oftentimes it's a great god, it's an all-powerful god, it's an omniscient god, it's a god who is good and all good, and a god should all be all good, and that's not necessarily true either. Gods do not necessarily represent all that is good, and also understanding the nuance of human beings as well as energies and power, that it is not good or bad, and actually those kind of binaries are not helpful for us in this way. And so coming out of that patriarchal kind of ideology and looking at some of the mythologies, for instance, can help you to understand that and help you to actually conceptualize that, to understand that some of the things that the gods did was not moral, even by their standards, was not considered moral. Oftentimes people, I think, can read some mythologies and think that because certain gods did certain things in that way back then, even though it's morally something that we wouldn't consider to be moral now, because they did it then, it was fine then. Actually, in a lot of cases, it was still considered to be taboo or not moral, not ethical then as well. So just because it's in the mythology and that's what the god or deity did, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was considered moral or ethical at that time. And that's not what these deities are here to show us about. Specifically, Greek mythology. The mythology tells stories about archetypes and about human behaviour. It speaks to situations and the ways in which power is used and manipulated and as a force, both for good and for less good, I suppose, words. But understanding that, you know, you're not necessarily going to be met with a spirit or an energy that is all good. It's a lot grayer than that. And the truth, especially when it comes to working with a dark deity, for instance, and I say dark because that is the common term, but yeah, it's not ideal. I mean, really, we're talking about deities in shadow, so deities who have been considered to be more malevolent to work with, or deities who are considered to be underworld deities, such as Persephone, for instance, such as Inanna, Ereshkigal, Kali, the Morrigan, Hecate, Lilith, etc. They are often aligned with the underworld and the darker, the night time, all of these things that are considered to be in shadow. And that's not because they're bad, but it is sometimes because these are things that have been oppressed, pushed away, and we think about shadow work, right? So working with a dark goddess is a lot of shadow work, and it is a lot of real work. It actually involves a lot more physical work than you would imagine. Not necessarily physical with the body, but like in manifest reality. Like, it's a lot of work, and it has been my experience as well with working with a number of shadow deities, dark deities. I have had this experience where some kind of status quo in your life, it is torn down, it's torn away from you, it's torn down with you in it. Very much tower card times. I mean, in the last 5-6 years, people have been talking about tower times because it's felt like we're constantly in tower times. It's just tower after tower after tower, sometimes it feels like, personally and collectively. And so when we're working with a dark goddess, some people will say that it's like your life gets turned upside down, and it does feel a bit like that, but that's not to deter you. It's not to make you think that it's bad. Again, not bad, no. Working with a dark goddess like the Morrigan or Lilith will tear down anything that is not built on stable, solid ground, just like the tower. It is going to pull up from the roots anything that is toxic or anything that is not serving you any longer, anything that is actually causing you pain or is a crutch for you, anything that is standing in your way, even if you don't see it yet, standing in your way of becoming your best self and becoming the person that you are meant to become, and embodying what is there for you to embody, you know, what that path that's in front of you. So oftentimes they will see ahead and they will know these things. Oftentimes they won't know everything. But it's crucial to remember that if you are inviting a dark goddess, for instance, Hecate, into your life, you may start to notice things changing around you. You may start to notice people treating you slightly different. You may start to notice your beliefs, ideas crumbling, changing, and that's normal too. And yes, it sounds scary and it can feel really scary. And for that reason, it's really important to be informed, not only about how to go about this process, but also about the deity and the lore, the mythology behind them. So when it comes to working with the dark goddess specifically, it can be more complicated than potentially working with a deity who is more well known, more established, and deals with kind of lighter subjects, let's say. But as a rule, I would suggest that working with any deity is going to cause impact in your life, and I don't think that there is any deity that is light and fluffy, even with what I just said in mind. Working, for instance, with a hearth deity like Hestia, that is going to be a lot more about comfort, support, stability. You're probably going to find things that are going to change around you, but there's less of a kind of sense of things crumbling and needing to change from the roots up. So that's all I mean. I don't mean that it's necessarily like a walk in the park. I wouldn't approach any deity with that kind of attitude either. It's just that when you're working with a dark deity or a dark goddess specifically, it's to be aware that some of these things in your life may be uprooted and it may be uncomfortable. And so learning how to work on your inner self, learning how to practice shadow work, learning how to work, learning how to be comfortable in discomfort, learning how to sit with your emotions, learning how to feel your emotions if that's something that you've not done very much of. And I think this is very common. This is something that I came up against when I was younger a lot and saw it, and I still see it a lot. A lot of people don't know how to handle grief or pain or emotions, and so they either project or they stuff under, and then it comes out in ways that are really, really undesirable. And yes, it can feel undesirable grieving and crying for a loss, but it's certainly healthier than holding it all in or projecting it on someone else. And so learning how to work with your shadows and learning how to embrace them, learning how to love yourself really is what it's all about. And to do that inner work, learning about what makes you tick, learning about what you believe in and what your ethics are and what you stand by, etc. And again, I'm going to go into that inner work piece and how you show up in the world, how you are treating others, and how you are presenting yourself, how are you being kind to others, and really considering that as a starting point. You know, what are you putting out into the world? Because that's a really, really important question. So let's talk about, how do you know if a deity is calling to you? This is such a popular and fun topic that people love to talk about. Some very, very common ways are signs and symbols and synchronicities that repeat. So oftentimes with the Morrigan, it's crows and lots of crows. Ravens as well sometimes, but ravens can potentially be other deities coming in. But there will be symbol after symbol, and it won't just be one, it'll be a number in numerous different ways. So someone might be talking to you about something and mention something, you might be watching something and something come up, you might dream about a particular symbol, you might then see that a particular symbol on someone's t-shirt, or see a bumper sticker with a particular symbol that's the same, or an advert with a particular symbol, and it will seem to be kind of coming in a lot. You might develop a keen interest in a particular archetype or a particular deity or a particular mythology or a particular story. You might watch something on TV, like a movie even, and find yourself associating with a particular character and their story, only to learn that the whole movie was based on a mythological story, in fact, and the character with which you are resonating with, it's because of a particular experience that you had when you were younger, and potentially a wound that you have, and that deity then is being presented to you so that you are able to potentially explore it if you wish to, so that you may work through some of these things to support your growth. You may find that you have dreams about a deity, or visions, journey work, etc. You may have a clairvoyant experience where you see in your mind's eye, or even with your actual sight, you may perceive a deity. So you may see a deity present in your dreams. They may not present as you would expect, and not necessarily with a human form either. They may take the form of an animal or an insect or a reptile, and they may shapeshift as well. In my experience working with dark goddesses, they have shapeshifted not only from animal form to human form, they have shapeshifted from female form to a masculine form to a non-binary form. And I think that actually a lot of deity do have that ability to shapeshift as well. You may receive messages in the hypnagogic state, either before sleep or after sleep as you are transitioning, or on the astral if you intentionally fly, spirit flight or astral travel, or maybe potentially unintentionally astral traveling or lucid dreaming. Again, these are all ways that you might experience something. You also might experience a dream that is more of an event, or some kind of very specific, very clear dream. The deity isn't necessarily in the dream, but you feel their presence almost like they're showing you the dream. That can also happen. There's also a deep inner knowing, really. Oftentimes some people will struggle to actually describe why, they just know, and that's valid as well. Different deities will feel different ways, and in my experience I think if you're not sure about which deity is calling out to you, I think whichever it is that feels the strongest to you, that is calling out to you, if you have like an instant knowing that it's a particular deity, even if it doesn't look like them or feel like them necessarily, it probably is that. But if there is nothing like that, then I would look into the symbolism and the feelings that you experience. I think that there is a different energy that comes with slightly different deities that you work with, but most of them, in my experience, will be persistent but not aggressive. They won't be demanding, they won't be disturbing, they won't ask you to do things that are dangerous for you or for other people. They won't put you in those situations. I will say that here, this is where psychosis and things like that is important to mention. There will be no time when this will happen. If that is your experience, then I would suggest seeing a professional mental health practitioner. I don't believe that any deity that you are connecting with will be demanding all of your time or taking from you obsessively or asking ridiculous things of you, asking you to go into bankruptcy, for instance, or demanding that you sacrifice a certain thing or in any way to harm yourself or anyone else. I do not believe that. Their presence might feel demanding once or twice, but it will be because they're trying to push you to do something. It won't be oppressive, it will be more a liberating experience. It will be tender and comforting, but not coddling. It's not going to tell you everything you want to hear. Sometimes you'll hear things you don't want to know or hear or feel. There will be support there, but as I said, it's not going to coddle you, it's not going to give you false comfort. And it's going to demand change, really. Change that is for your highest and greatest good. It will be fierce, but it will be supportive and it will be radically honest. But yeah, definitely there'll be a feeling of emancipation, I feel like. And I think eventually if you do not want to work with a deity, they will stop calling out to you. But if you don't want to work with a deity and you've noticed they're reaching out to you, it's probably best to explain to them that you don't want to work with them, and that's fine, that's your choice. But also they probably will continue to reach out to you for a bit, and it may feel intrusive sometimes, but it's not ever going to be harmful to you or anyone else. So when it comes to actually how to start working with a deity or the dark goddess, I think the first place is to start with writing down your experience. If you've had one or several, write them down. Write down thoughts, feelings, things you witnessed, experienced, things you saw, things you heard, everything. Write down every single detail, even if it's just a slight little tickle. Write it down. You know, a tremble, butterflies in your stomach, write it down. Write down any visions and any senses at all. Write them down, and anything as well of significance that was happening at the same time. You might wish to record, for instance, the lunation that was occurring, if there are any planets in a particular transit or any aspects that are really poignant or anything that is hitting your chart specifically. Personally, if you work with astrology, you may wish to perform some form of divination, usually tarot for me. You may wish to use a pendulum, you may wish to scry. So again, record any of those. When you're about to perform your divination, it's probably a good idea to form some kind of protective circle or some kind of protection around you, and to speak to spirit to explain that you are wanting to connect to this deity or to receive clarity about your connection with this deity, and then write all of that down. And then really the first step, those are kind of preliminary steps, but really the first step, if you're sure it's a particular deity, or again, if you're not sure it's a particular deity and you're looking into it, research. You might want to start with some kind of encyclopedia of goddesses. I've got an encyclopedia of goddesses and heroines over there. There are other books, smaller books, that go into sort of dark goddesses or goddesses in general or Greek mythology, etc. So start wherever is right for you to start, but definitely go to the source material. So the first piece of mythology that was written about the goddess or deity in question, find those. Great resources for someone like the Morrigan would be the Irish pagan school, Laura O'Brien. Another person is Morgan Daimler. Another person is Morpheus Ravenna, who has a great book. There's Joey Morris, who works with the Morrigan as well. There's Courtney Webber as well, who wrote a book about the Morrigan that I enjoyed. There are a lot of resources out there, and oftentimes these authors, especially Laura O'Brien, Morgan Daimler, will direct you to the source material. And actually Morgan Daimler is translating some of the source material as well, and they are some of the best translations. So I would definitely follow those people. If If you're looking into, for instance, deity in something like the Welsh pantheon, I would look at people like Christopher Hughes, look at Mara Starling. Their work with the spirits of the Welsh landscape, the land and deities and fairies, the fae, etc. will be really important for that kind of exploration, I think. But with every deity, it's going to be different. There's going to be different kinds of mythology, sometimes very little. So it's important to get your hands on the most accurate source material that you can, and to just do your due diligence, do your research. And also, if it's your first time working with a deity, really consider your approach, and again, all the things I've kind of discussed already about what is a thoughtful, considered and respectful approach. Not only do you want to consider the mythology, you want to consider the land that the deity is from and the culture as well, and any kind of important cultural history, etc. about the land as well, for instance, occupation, etc. For first contact, you're going to want to do this, however, in whatever way you practice, whatever way works for you. For instance, it might be within a journey where you're now settling down and going into some kind of trance state, either with a meditation. You might find there are some lovely meditations online, or you might find, if you're more experienced, you can just put some music on, just go into a trance state and see what happens, you know, with setting the intention that you're going to make that contact in that way, set the intention for a dream, and in that kind of dream incubation way that you meet a deity, learning about some of the things that they enjoy receiving as offerings, looking at the source material. It obviously is important for that mythological basis, but then also considering other practitioners' experiences, like mine, for instance, which you can take with a pinch of salt because it's UPG, unverified personal gnosis, but then you can get collective gnosis as well, which is basically similar kind of, if you are talking in groups and you notice that people have similar experiences with a particular deity. So that's often really, really interesting to talk to other practitioners who work with the same deity. You're going to want to learn when you're researching about the kinds of things that they enjoy as offerings. And also, if you're not sure, you can ask them. So in that first contact, you can essentially create a safe space for yourself where it's nice and quiet, you won't be disturbed, you know, be in a meditative, calm state and come with an offering of a candle, maybe offer a libation. Obviously, please don't pour any kind of alcohol or salt or any kind of sugar or anything like that on the land. But if you are in your home, for instance, you may wish to put a glass of wine or mead or milk or something that you feel intuitively would be appreciated by the deity, and you can ask them when you make that first contact. I would write a prayer from the heart, or you can speak intuitively your prayer. Make it sincere, heartfelt, and you're onto a winner. And speak with reference. Speak about the things, as I said, that you are interested in, the things that you want to learn from them potentially. Explain to them that you honour them and that you are thankful for them, that you invite them into your space and that you're grateful for their presence, that you welcome them and that you honour them and that you're grateful for them. The next step would be to explain that you're open to communication if that is appropriate for you, within meditation, within journey, within ritual, within dream work, etc. And to keep a journal about your experiences as closely as possible. I would create a little space that's dedicated to them. It doesn't have to be a full-blown altar space. I know some people are in the closet, so it can just be a little shelf in a cupboard. It can just be a candle and perhaps a tarot card, or even just a candle on your bedside table, and you know what it's for. You know, it depends how in the closet you are and how open your space is to people who, you know, will not approve or who don't know, etc. So keep yourself safe at all times, but you know, you can connect to a deity with nothing more than your words and your reverence, really. So, you know, if you can do nothing else, a chalice of water, a glass of water and a candle is completely sufficient. You can make your sacred space to your deity as elaborate as you wish. I brought the Morrigan today. She is here. So this is a statue that I acquired a number of years ago from Blaggerwood Designs from Etsy. It was costly, but I invested in it, and the Morrigan I've been working with for over 5 years, so it makes sense for me. You can find a lot of these types of pieces secondhand as well on eBay and such. Obviously they would need a good cleanse, but also you can create your own out of clay. That's a really beautiful thing to do, so it does not have to be costly. Many people like to offer flowers, meals, sweet treats, fruits, crystals, herbs as offerings, candles, water, incense. I often for the Morrigan will do prayers on the incense, smoke. That's really beautiful. You can also offer actual real world work. So for the Morrigan, activism is a massive thing. Things like being a steward of your land, picking up litter, trash, donating to charitable causes in your area, getting involved in local communities, supporting those in need, even if it's your next door neighbours who are elderly and need support with groceries and things like that. Those can be devotional acts to your deity. For the Morrigan, working out can be a great offering. Lilith as well loves that. Sweating your prayers. There is a book called Sweat Your Prayers by Gabrielle Roth. She is the author of The 5 Rhythms. It's about embodiment dance, and it's literally sweating your prayers if you are dedicating a workout to your deity. It's really, really beautiful and profound. For a goddess like Lilith, or for the Morrigan, I mean, the Morrigan being associated with battles and sovereignty and empowerment, it really, really makes a lot of sense. What you really are aiming for is cultivating a relationship over time, and you don't get that through love bombing or like grand gestures and then you forget them for 6 months. What's more important is consistency. So, you know, if you're giving them a glass of water each day, if that's too much, try doing a glass of water each week, and that will be sufficient. And a prayer or two, that is sufficient, you know. And some people will add more to that. And the idea, the best way to approach it is to layer it. So not to try and do it all at once, but instead to build your habit with small practices. Maybe sitting and having a cup of coffee with a deity in the morning, sitting in the afternoon with a cup of tea and sharing with the deity you work with. Respecting boundaries and respecting promises. Don't make promises you can't keep. That's really, really key. And when it comes to things like making offerings that are personal, be very, very well informed when it comes to bodily fluids, etc. In terms of offering bodily fluids, it's very important to be informed, to do so safely, and to understand what kind of commitment that is. Usually someone who is not devoted to a deity or dedicated to a deity might not do that kind of practice, but if you are and you understand the specific associations and ramifications of such a practice with your deity, then fair dues. Just be safe with it if you are utilizing particular body fluids. Respect consent, consistency, respecting time, respecting energy, not making demands, not making promises you can't keep. I think I've touched on a lot of them. And trusting the process. You know, you might ask a question like, what is it that they want from you, and then not hear for a while, and then you'll just sort of understand that you kind of have to figure it out yourself. With the Morrigan, I've asked questions and it's been sort of silence, and I've had to figure it out for myself, and I will know if it's the right thing after I've done it. And yeah, usually it's very much like, I'm not going to spoon feed you, you need to figure this out. And then she will go and she'll let me get on with it. And my experience of Lilith was more consistent, more present, but also again, like letting me know what it is that she expects, but then it's down to you, and then things would escalate if they weren't done. So it's really important to be honourable and to have integrity, I think, and to be honest. And if you make a mistake, if you miss something, just be honest about it and then continue and do your best to trust the process. Don't be afraid. If you're afraid, perhaps you need to just spend a bit more time learning and reading before you go ahead. Try not to be afraid. A little bit of, you know, nervousness, anxiety is kind of understandable at first, but you don't want to be approaching something if you're really, really scared of it, because that is only going to lead to, I think, you getting more and more frightened and things perhaps not being so fun for you. If you haven't got a meditation practice, I think that that's a really, really key thing to establish early on before you approach the deity, to be honest, because I think a lot of messages come through with meditation, and I think a lot of practices, energetic practices as well, that you are going to want to utilize and that are going to be useful for you and that are going to be helpful for you and supportive are going to come from that discipline of meditation. I have a video on meditation if you'd like to watch it. I would also recommend that you familiarize yourself with what shadow work is, what the shadow is, look into the work of Carl Jung and understand what that means and how to actually practice it yourself. Many people will have differing ideas of how this is done, and so the best thing I think is to learn, read, discover. I would definitely go to reading the work of Jung. I would also read some of the work of Robert A. Johnson about the shadow, as well as Connie Zwig, who is a Jungian practitioner, and you can get more clarity that way. And I would also start a shadow work practice of your own, including some journaling, perhaps using divination. Essentially, what you want to do is observe your shadow in real time, journal about that and explore that with journal prompts, etc. You may wish to employ other techniques such as spell work, ritual, dream analysis. Again, that's a Jungian technique. The dark moon and the new moon and sometimes the full moon are very key for working with goddesses, so that's something that you probably are already aware of if you're here. That's something that you can look into more. So really annoyingly, my camera has just died, so that's not very helpful. But I will just add, before I go, a few more things that you might wish to lean into, as well as moon magic. You might wish to look into certain herbs that correspond to the deity that you are working with. Please don't approach plant spirits as if they are things to be used. You can incorporate them into offerings, but again, respect the spirit, which is separate from the deity. So approach with, again, respect, reverence, and that should be fine. And so those are offerings that you can make, physical offerings, as we've said. You may wish to practice some basic spell work, so protection spells, confidence boosting spells, empowerment spells, those kinds of things, as well as divination for ways in which you can support your community, ways in which you can show devotion to your deity. You can also practice things like, as I said, a workout or some kind of embodiment practice, dance, etc. These things are really beautiful within ritual and really, really great for raising energy, especially if you are doing more spell work or more kind of devotional work throughout. So yeah, those are really, really beautiful ways that you can practice. And really, you can incorporate any kind of magic you want to working with a deity. So sigils, you can create your own sigils for a deity. You can work with sigils that already exist. For instance, Lilith already has a sigil, and you can learn about the deity as well from different traditions and different paradigms, etc., which sort of approach different ways. So for instance, Lilith, there's a lot in contemporary spaces about Lilith being a feminist kind of icon, but going a lot deeper than that, you know, there are roots in Gnosticism. I mean, the mythology goes back to Mesopotamian, Babylonian, Sumerian. Lilith was considered one time to be a handmaiden, a priestess of Inanna. You can look into that mythology, but then also understand that Lilith was brought into Gnosticism and brought into Kabbalah, and the Qliphoth being the left-hand path, the other tree of life, the tree of knowledge, thought of as the kind of shells, the husks, the waste matter of the tree of life. So look into Kabbalah. You can start to understand the deity from many different aspects and paradigms. So I encourage you to quest. I encourage you to be curious. I encourage you to have integrity, to be honest, to be genuine, and to seek to be compassionate and to show up in the world as you would want to be seen. So that about wraps it up. So please, if you have any questions, please leave them below. Let me know what you'd like to see. If you'd like to see any other videos along these lines, I'm happy to share. Potentially I will be filming some videos about the Morrigan and Lilith in the future. So if you've got any questions regarding that, thank you for being here. I hope this has been useful. Please like, share, comment, subscribe if it has been. I have Patreon, Instagram, Ko-fi, buy me a coffee, the super thanks below. There's lots of ways to support below, so click below if you wish to. Thank you for being here. I hope that you are well and stay well and safe, and I look forward to seeing you again in another video really soon. All right, take care. Many blessings. Mwah. Bye.